Good afternoon. Does anyone in the audience enjoy doing puzzles? Lots of people. I've always enjoyed doing puzzles. As a kid, I loved logic puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, really any kind of puzzle. And when I was an undergraduate, I started working in a research lab, and I realized that scientists actually solve real-life puzzles for a career, and I knew that was what I wanted to do in my life. So I think of addressing a scientific problem as building this huge jigsaw puzzle, but you can't see the picture until the puzzle is complete. Many different scientists from around the world are all working on this same puzzle at the same time. Now, each piece of puzzle is like a new piece of data. Some of them fit easily into the puzzle, and others sit aside for many years waiting for the context in order to be able to place them appropriately. But all of the scientists' aims are eventually to finish this puzzle, and when the puzzle's finished, we'll have a better way of preventing or treating a disease. Now, I've been working on the same puzzle for more than 20 years. A long time. And one day, after I placed a particularly complex piece of puzzle, which was describing a new way in which the bacterium Streptococcus pneumoniae can bind to the lining of your airway, I thought maybe that puzzle piece would fit in this jigsaw over here. But as you know, you can't really move one piece of jigsaw from one puzzle to another. Still, these pieces had some characteristics in common. So we started to work on this new puzzle, and we became interested in it. And we started to focus on that, and that has been the research interest in my lab for the last year or two. And that's what I'm going to tell you about today. That puzzle is infective endocarditis. Infective endocarditis is a bacterial infection of the lining of your heart, typically of the valves. Now, the valves in your heart make sure that the blood circulates appropriately. But if bacteria stick to those valves and start to grow, the valve can't function properly. So as you can see here in the bottom panel, there's a bacterial growth on that valve. So these growths cause the symptoms of infective endocarditis, which include fever, fatigue, and breathlessness. In addition, these growths can break off, go through the circulatory system, and get stuck and cause a stroke. We currently treat infective endocarditis with antibiotics. You have to take antibiotics for an extended period of time, and they don't actually work very well. In fact, 50% of patients with infective endocarditis end up needing surgery to replace or repair the valve. So clearly there's a need for a better treatment. So in order to get infective endocarditis, you need to get bacteria in your blood. And you might be surprised to learn that these bacteria actually come from your mouth. Now, in your mouth, these bacteria are actually harmless. In fact, they might even be a good thing. It's thought that they might stop the bacteria that cause dental decay from growing. But if they enter your bloodstream, clearly this can be a problem. So you may or may not know that poor oral health has been linked with many different diseases, including diabetes, poor pregnancy outcome, Alzheimer's, and even cancer. Many of these interactions are complex and we don't fully understand them. But in the case of infective endocarditis, it's known that the bacteria actually access your bloodstream from your mouth. So in a healthy mouth, you can see here the gum is growing up the side of the tooth. But if you have gum disease, that tissue pulls away from the tooth and you end up with a pocket. So if you've ever been to the dental hygienist, and actually I was at my dentist this morning, ironically, but you can hear them calling numbers sometimes when they touch your tooth. 3, 2, 1, for example. And if they call a number greater than 4, you actually have some kind of gum disease. Now, you wouldn't be alone, because I think more than 50% of Americans, adults, have some kind of gum disease. But this gum disease makes it easier for the bacteria to actually access the bloodstream. So it's really important that you do see your dentist regularly. And I don't just mean at the gym or at the supermarket. And that we floss our teeth. So once the bacteria get in your blood, and alarmingly, studies have shown that 1/4 of people, when they brush their teeth, end up with bacteria in their blood. So considering the fact that we brush our teeth on average twice a day, that's a lot of people getting bacteria in their bloodstream regularly. But still, most of us aren't getting infective endocarditis, so what else is required? Well, if you get damage to your heart valve, which a small number of the population do at any one time, then you can develop infective endocarditis. So here's my little cartoon. If you get damage at a site in your body, small things in your blood called platelets rush to the site of damage. There they bind, they attract other platelets to bind, and they start the process of healing. Now clearly this is a good thing, because if you get an site of injury, you need it repaired. That is, unless you have bacteria in your blood which are bound to platelets. In that case, the platelet can act as a Trojan horse, actually taking the bacteria to your heart valve and the site of damage. There it can multiply and eventually lead to the kind of growth that I showed you earlier. Now, this is likely to be an increasing problem. We know that older people have more problems with oral health. And we also know that older people have more problems with their heart, including damage to the valves. Get this to work. So as we know, the population is aging rapidly in the United States and worldwide. So although now there are estimated to be between 40 and 100,000 cases of infective endocarditis every year, we would expect that number to rise over the next 50 years. So what scientific question are we addressing in my laboratory? What puzzle are we working on? Well, we're addressing how a specific organism, Streptococcus aureus, binds to platelets. As I've already told you, binding to platelets is an essential step in the disease process. So we think if we can prevent that, we may develop a way of preventing or treating this disease more effectively. So how does it bind to platelets? Well, Streptococcus aureus has not really been studied very much at all, but some related bacteria are known to bind to carbohydrates on the surface of platelets. And so when I say carbohydrates, you might be thinking of this, or something like this. But in reality, all molecules made by the human body and all surfaces in your body are covered with complex carbohydrates. Now these are structures made up of simple sugars, and they serve a lot of functions. But one thing that happens is that bacteria can use those to bind to your body. So other bacteria that cause endocarditis are known to bind to the terminal or end carbohydrate on some of these structures. Now, the way I'm showing it to you here is very simple. There's one adenosine, a molecule in the bacterium, and one on the carbohydrate, and they're binding together. But obviously, it's a much more complex interaction than that. And many of these interactions are going on at the same time. They're all pretty weak, but overall, we think of it like Velcro. A lot of weak interactions allow binding of that bacteria to the platelet. So with Streptococcus aureus, when we started, no one knew how it bound to platelets. Now, clearly, it might bind in the same way to this terminal carbohydrate, and we've since shown that it does. But what we did know is the bacteria actually makes a molecule that can cleave off that terminal carbohydrate. So if you think about that for a minute, it doesn't make a lot of sense that this would be the only way that the bacteria can bind to a platelet. We think of it like this. It's like you're sitting on a branch and you're cutting that branch off at the same time. So this is where I thought maybe I could place that other piece of puzzle. We'd previously shown that Streptococcus pneumoniae could bind to a carbohydrate that was revealed by the removal of that terminal carbohydrate. And we thought perhaps Streptococcus aureus could do the same thing. And in fact, we now know that it does. Now, the reason those puzzle pieces couldn't be moved from one puzzle directly to the other is because they actually bind that carbohydrate in different ways, which actually makes it more interesting and was what piqued our interest. So we call this sequential binding because the bacteria first binds to the terminal carbohydrate, which is then removed, and then it can bind to the underlying carbohydrate. Now, I've told you how this might be important in infective endocarditis. And in my laboratory, we're trying to understand this mechanism in order to develop a way of preventing or treating disease. But many bacteria bind complex carbohydrates, and some of those bacteria can actually modify them or cleave those carbohydrates. So we think the idea of sequential adherence may be important in many different bacterial infections. So we're really just starting on this new puzzle. I want to say that we started from the corner. We're doing a good job of building out. But we still have a long way to go. And we hope that over the next few years, we can actually complete this puzzle, and with that, develop a better way of preventing or treating this disease. Thank you.